You are listening to the Night Watch Records. Record entry 1150. Time is not a straight line. It is a vast, tangled forest where some wander in and never find their way out. We often define isolation as a prison of space, a lighthouse, a desert, a cell. But the most terrifying form of isolation is the one that separates you from your own reality. Imagine stepping through a door and finding yourself in a world where the sun burns too bright, where the food tastes like ash, and where the very air feels like a foreign poison. To be lost in a different land is a tragedy. To be lost in a different existence is a nightmare. In the year 1150, during the chaotic and blood-soaked reign of King Stephen, the village of Woolpit in Suffolk was a place governed by the cycles of the earth and the heavy hand of superstition. It was a land of thick, gray mud, rusted iron, and the constant, gnawing fear of the wolves that prowled the surrounding woods. The villagers lived in a world of muted colors, browns, grays, and the dull yellow of dying hay. To protect their livestock, they dug deep, treacherous trenches known as wolf pits, designed to trap the predators that haunted their nights. But on one particular morning during the harvest, the pits caught something far more unsettling than a wolf. The sun was straining through a heavy autumnal mist when the harvesters first heard the sound. A high-pitched, rhythmic crying that didn't belong to any animal they knew. As they approached the edge of the trenches, the air grew unnaturally still. From the depths of the earth emerged two figures, clutching each other with a desperation that transcended language. They were children, a boy and a girl, standing in the damp soil of the pit. But it was not their fear that froze the blood of the villagers. It was the impossible hue of their skin. Every inch of their exposed flesh was a deep, vibrant shade of green, the color of a forest at dusk, the color of moss growing over a forgotten tombstone. Their clothing was equally alien, made of a shimmering, seamless fabric that defied the heavy wool and linen of 12th century England. It caught the light in ways the villagers couldn't understand, reflecting an iridescent sheen that looked like the wings of a beetle. They stood there, blinking in the harsh midday sun as if the light itself were a physical weight on their shoulders. When the villagers spoke, the children recoiled. Their own voices carried a melody that no scholar could identify, a series of trills and soft consonants that sounded like the wind moving through unseen caves. They were the ultimate outsiders, castaways not from a distant country, but from a different frequency of life. In that moment, surrounded by a crowd of terrified peasants, the children were more alone than any man at sea. They were looking at a world they did not recognize, and the world was looking back at them with eyes of judgment and fear. They were the Green Children of Woolpit, and their arrival had just fractured the history of the surface world forever. The children were taken from the fields to the manor of Sir Richard de Con, a man whose curiosity was tempered by a rare streak of mercy. However, mercy is a poor bridge when the chasm between two worlds is so wide. For days, the manor became a silent battlefield of survival. Sir Richard offered them the finest bread from his ovens, the richest meats from his hunts, and the freshest water the English countryside could provide. To the children, however, this abundance was nothing more than colorful waste. They pushed the plates away, their green faces growing gaunt and hollow, their eyes reflecting a hunger that was not just physical, but spiritual. They were starving in a land of plenty, unable to recognize the very concept of human food. It was as if their bodies were tuned to a different laws of biology. The isolation of the manor was absolute. The children sat in the shadows of the stone walls, away from the windows, flinching at the sound of church bells and the clatter of iron. They were like birds trapped in a lightless box, mourning a sky that no one else could see. The turning point came purely by chance. A servant entered the kitchen carrying a bundle of freshly harvested green beans, still clinging to their long, vibrant stalks. The reaction from the children was instantaneous and primal. They lunged for the beans, their eyes wide with a frantic, desperate recognition. They had finally found something that looked like home, but even this relief was tinged with a strange, tragic confusion. When they grabbed the pods, they did not look for the seeds inside. Instead, they tried to tear open the stalks themselves, weeping when they found them empty. It was only after a servant showed them how to open the pods that they began to eat. They consumed the raw beans with a ferocity that was haunting to witness, as if they were finally drinking from a well in a desert. For many months, they would touch nothing else. The beans were their only tether to life, the only thing in this bright, loud world that didn't feel like a lie. But the crossing between worlds had taken a heavy toll. The younger boy, who had always seemed more fragile, began to wither. He could not adapt to the heavy atmosphere or the harsh, unforgiving sunlight of the surface. He spent his days staring at the flickering shadows on the floor, perhaps searching for a doorway that had long since closed behind him. Despite every effort, he eventually succumbed to a quiet, hollow death. He died a stranger in a strange land, leaving his sister to face the silence alone. His passing was the first true sealing of the file, a silent admission that some things are not meant to survive the transition from the dark into the light. Now, the girl was the sole bearer of the secret, and as the green hue slowly began to fade from her skin, a deeper transformation was taking place. She was losing her connection to her home, trading her emerald skin for the ability to finally speak the language of her captors. And the story she was about to tell would make the villagers of Woolpit wish they had never looked into the wolf pits at all. As the months bled into years, the green hue that had once defined the girl began to recede, like a tide pulling back from a shore. Her skin took on the pale, sun-touched tones of the local villagers, and with this physical change came the acquisition of their tongue. The language of Woolpit, once a chaotic noise to her ears, became a tool she could finally use to bridge the gap between two realities. But as she learned to speak, she did not find comfort. She found the burden of explanation. When Sir Richard and the local scholars finally sat her down to ask the question that had haunted the village since that harvest morning, her answer was not of a distant country across the sea, but of a place that felt like a shadow cast by our own world. She called it St. Martin's Land. In her description, it was a place of perpetual evening, a world where the sun never rose and the stars never fell. There was no noon, no scorching heat, and no absolute darkness. Instead, the entire horizon was bathed in a soft, unchanging twilight, as if the world were caught in the breath between sunset and night. Everything there was green, not just the people, but the very air itself seemed to carry a verdant glow. She spoke of a great, luminous river that separated her home from a shining land in the distance, a place that was far brighter and more vibrant, but one that her people could never reach. It was a world of stillness, a civilization existing in the periphery of our own, undisturbed for eons. The story of their arrival was even more unsettling. She and her brother had been tending to their father's cattle in the twilight fields of St. Martin's Land when they heard a sound, a deep, resonant metallic ringing that vibrated through the very ground. It was a sound of immense beauty and power, unlike anything in their silent world. Drawn by the melody, they followed the echoes into a massive limestone cavern. As they wandered deeper into the darkness, guided only by the rhythmic tolling of what we now know were the bells of Berry Street Edmonds Abbey, the air began to change. The cool dampness of the cave was suddenly replaced by a wave of heat and a light so blinding it felt like a physical blow. When they emerged from the other side of the tunnel, they were no longer in the twilight. They were in the wolf pits of Woolpit, trapped in the crushing glare of a midday sun, surrounded by the cacophony of a world they were never meant to see. The tunnel, when they turned back to find it, was gone, or perhaps it was never a tunnel at all, but a momentary fracture in the fabric of time and space, a bridge that had collapsed the moment they crossed it. The girl survived, but she remained a permanent exile. She was eventually baptized and given the name Agnes, integrating into the household and later the town of King's Lynn. Contemporary records suggest she was rather loose and wanton in her conduct, perhaps a polite medieval way of saying she never truly adjusted to the rigid, stifling structures of 12th century society. To Agnes, our world was perhaps too loud, too bright, and too violent. She had traded her emerald skin and her twilight home for a life of service in a world that viewed her as a curiosity at best and a herald of ill omen at worst. She eventually married a senior diplomat, disappearing into the footnotes of history, a displaced soul living out her days in a reality that wasn't hers. But the file on the Green Children of Woolpit cannot be closed so easily. For centuries, scholars and skeptics have tried to strip away the mystery. Some suggest a rational, tragic explanation, that the children were Flemish orphans, fleeing the persecution of King Henry II, suffering from chlorosis, a form of anemia caused by malnutrition that can give the skin a greenish tint. They argue the children were lost in the flint mines of the area, emerging disoriented and speaking a dialect of Flemish that the uneducated villagers of Woolpit couldn't recognize. It is a neat, logical theory, yet it fails to explain the shimmering, seamless clothes or the children's utter terror of the sun. A sun that shines just as brightly in Flanders as it does in England. Then there are the darker, more atmospheric theories that align with the records of the Night Watch. These theories suggest a temporal slip, a fold in the map of existence where 2 points in time or 2 different versions of Earth momentarily touched. St. Martin's Land may not have been a place under the ground, but a place beside us, a parallel resonance where the sun never broke through the atmosphere. The children didn't walk through a cave. They walked through a wound in reality. When that wound healed, they were left on the wrong side of the scar. We are left with the image of a young woman standing on the coast of England, looking out at the gray Atlantic, perhaps still listening for the faint, rhythmic tolling of bells that might lead her back to the twilight. Her story is the ultimate testament to the loneliness of the survivor. To be the only one who remembers a world that no longer exists is a form of isolation that no map can chart. The Green Children were not just visitors. They were refugees from a lost dimension, a reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not as solid as we choose to believe. The entry is complete. The candles are flickering low, and the shadows of the past are retreating into the corners of the archive. Whatever the truth may be, the Green Children remain a silent echo in the halls of history, a mystery frozen in the mud of a Suffolk field. The file is locked. Rest now and remember, not every door you find is meant to be opened. Good night.